All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the weekly Mac Forum video chat. Hope you enjoy this evening's chat. We have a lot of good information for you. I hope that you'll enjoy it. I'm certainly going to enjoy bringing it to you. There are a couple of things I want to be sure I run through this evening. First of all, let's get right on to site update. Updated site information here. In the previous week, we added a total of 695 new members, if I did the math correctly. As of about half an hour before the show, the newest member was Susie, S-U-U-Z-I. Apologies if I mispronounced that. Also hid my face there with the show notes there for just a second. Sorry about that. Dropped something. All right, but I do want to welcome all of our new users. Hopefully they will find some enjoyable and useful information in the forum. Let's get right into some of the things that came up this week. Of course, one of the big announcements, big things this week was related, a lot of the news was related to the Apple Watch. We'll get to that in a moment. But before I do that, let's move into the tips and tricks segment of the show. And this has to do, these kinds of things right now have to do with at the moment we're dealing with a problem with iPhoto. This first tip has to deal with iPhoto. If you have recently updated and gone to 10.10.3, to Yosemite version 10.10.3, you know that it includes the new Photos application. Well, that application it doesn't remove iPhoto. The problem, though, is that you have to be updated to the current version of iPhoto, which is 9.6.1, in order for things to run correctly. You can find your version by going into your applications folder, single click on the iPhoto app, and do Command I to see the version number in the Get Info window that appears. If you're not on 9.6.1, you may find, as some of our members have, that when you go to update, the App Store gives you a warning. There are a couple of different warnings that I've seen on the internet as possible things that might come up. If you get a warning and Apple's App Store just will not update, it gives you, tells you that it's not available, this, that, and the other, one possibility to fix it is to do the following. Remove iPhoto, remove the application. Don't remove your iPhoto database. Those are two separate things. Remove the application and then go back into the App Store. Make sure you're logged into your account and go to the Purchases tab. And you should now be able to update. I found that tip on the Apple support site. I think, now the user in question on that site mentioned that they deleted the old iPhoto version and then went in and did the install of the 9.6.1. I think it would also work if you simply moved your existing iPhoto application to another location so the App Store can't find it. Move it to another drive, move it to a different folder, something like that. But I haven't tested that. But in essence, what's happening is it's telling you that you can't download go in and move that application and then retry the download, and you should get the current version, 9.6.1. I haven't run into that problem. When I updated, the update went smoothly, but one of our Mac Forum members ran into that issue, and I was able to find that solution. It worked very well for him. Okay. Another one, this is something that we have covered before, I think, on the show, but I wanted to mention it again because it's still posing some issues for some of our users. iTunes and the way that it sorts certain albums. If you're finding that iTunes is not pulling in, is not organizing your songs correctly, and for example, specifically if it's not grouping all of the songs in an album together, the solution to that is frequently found by dealing with tagging issues. Something may not be tagged properly. For example, in the album title, let's say that you've got 12 tracks that compose a certain album. If the album information, the album title on those 12 tracks is not identical, the tracks are going to get grouped separately. That means if there's any hidden space differences, any extra characters in one of the titles, it's going to get messed up and separated into different things. It's literally reading it as different albums. So what you want to do is make sure that all of those tracks have the same album title. The other thing that will cause this sometimes is when you open, let's say you select a series of tracks, you do get info, Command I in iTunes, and you look at the details list, and everything looks okay. You look at the album title, it looks okay, but it's still not sorting properly. Next, go over to the sorting tab and check the entries there and make sure those are accurate, because sometimes what's entered in the sorting field in that sort tab, and what's entered in the info version, in the detail version, are not exactly identical. And when no matter how that happens, once it does happen, sometimes it messes up the sorting. And you can find that, you will see that issue sometimes when you have an album, for example, in one area, it might be entered, the artist name might be entered as Allman Brothers, and in another area, it might be entered as the Allman Brothers. That's going to cause those tracks to be in different parts of your library. Little things like that. So when you are experiencing organizational issues within iTunes, do some checking on that, on the tagging and the way that tracks are tagged. Also remember that when you need to, say if you're doing an entire album, you can select a series of tracks and enter the album information by entering, for all those tracks at one time. So, and I linked in the post where I was in the thread where I was trying to help one of our members, I linked to a video that shows this. The video is for an earlier version of iTunes. So the get info box does not look identical to what it did in iTunes, what it does in iTunes 12, but the principles are still the same. In other words, it should still work. And then that same tip fixes another issue. When you have a multi-disc set, okay, iTunes will often put those individual disks as separate entities. Now, generally, they're right next to each other. But what if you wanted all of them grouped together? So, for example, I have a Bill Monroe collection, Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, that I downloaded from the iTunes store. That one appears correctly, but if it's a CD that you've ripped, they may appear as separate entities. Here's what will fix that. Okay, let's assume you've got a 3-disc set. I would go into the first one, select the tracks that are in that first one, first a disc. I'm going to go in, I'm going to select the album title, and then there's a number there. It's going to say disc 1 of whatever. I'm going to change that so that it reads, in this case, 1 of 3. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to select the tracks in disc 2. I'm going to put in the same album name, the exact same album name, so that it puts them together. But then in the disc listing, where it has the disc number, I'm going to put in disc 2 of 3, and then I'm going to do the same thing for disc 3 of 3. For some albums, I'll also need to, for compilation albums, where you have multiple artists in the same album, you'll need to check that field to clear a few things up. The video, I think, if I remember correctly, the video that I linked to covers both of those situations. The other place to look for good information is Kirk McLaren, sometimes known on the internet. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He's written extensively for Macworld. He's also got his own website. He's written extensively about iTunes issues. I've referenced him before, specifically in terms of dealing with the size limitations of iTunes library, in the iTunes library. Kirk probably has forgotten more about iTunes organizational issues than I know. Always a good one to look for. So that deals with the iTunes one. I want to mention also, we had a user ask a question about, remember Harry B has in his signature, at the end of his signature, a phrase that says basically, hang on to those CDs, system CDs, like Grim Death. Don't let go of them because you're going to need them at some point. And for 10.7 and higher, make sure that you have a bootable disk. One of our members asked a question about how to do that. So I linked to some directions from Macworld about how to fix, how to create a bootable disk. I have a link to that. I know we've discussed it in the past, but it keeps coming up, so it can't hurt to link to it again. My personal solution for needing something to boot from is to have a workable clone, a bootable clone. Whether you use a carbon copy cloner, which clones the recovery partition as well as the boot drive, or whether you use a Super Duper, which performs essentially the same task, but it does not clone the recovery drive. Now, the thing that I like about having a clone as opposed to one of these bootable USB sticks is that the clone, I don't have to re-download the installation. If I've already run the installer, that installer file is gone, and before I can create a boot disk, I have to do the download again and make another one. But with a bootable clone, I can get back up and running quickly in less time than it takes me to download the file. Forget about the installation time. I can get back up and running with a bootable clone in less time than it takes you to perform an installation especially if you include the amount of time that it takes to pull your data in from a backup. Yes, you do have to make sure that you keep the clone up to date, but that really doesn't take very long at all. Carbon copy cloner in particular is good at doing incremental clone. Once you do the first one, it will, when it runs subsequent clones, look and see what files have changed and only update those. It doesn't update the entire installation. So whereas it may take several hours to do the first clone, subsequent clones are done in a matter of a few minutes. So that's something to keep in mind. But whichever one you need to do, whichever one you choose, whether you choose a bootable USB stick or a clone, make sure that you have something like that for troubleshooting purposes. And then that does it for the tips and tricks. So let's move on to some of the news and Mac news and information that came out this week. For one thing, one of the things is, of course, this week a lot of the buzz has had to do with the Apple Watch, and that's a good thing in a way. I was looking just today, just before the show. Cult of Mac has some data on the extent to which the Apple Watch may dominate the wearable market. Their estimate, which they took from another publication, I think it had something like 900,000 pre-orders that were being filled in the period when they became available. And they compared that with 720,000 units of the Google wearable that shipped last year. So in a short period of time, if these numbers hold up, the Apple Watch will have surpassed the number of Google wearables that was sold last year. The part of this, as they point out, may be a result of the Apple marketing juggernaut. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Here's the thing. When Apple markets the Apple Watch, that's one company marketing one wearable. The Google wearable market, for better or worse, or the Android wearable market, for lack of a better word, is somewhat fractured. You've got different manufacturers, all with slightly different takes on the wearable movement. That's a good thing from a use perspective, but from a marketing perspective, it might make things a little more difficult. So they have those numbers, which are good. And then the other thing that they have at the Cult of Mac that I found kind of interesting, you're already starting to see some how-tos appear on how to do different things using the Apple Watch. Cult of Mac's how-to section, for example, listed several things from organizing your watch's home screen, customizing the way notifications behave, a tip for how to manage playing music on the watch. Obviously, because of storage issues, the watch isn't actually doing the play. It's relying on a playlist from another device, but and then using headphones, for example. But it's an interesting tip for how to do that if it hadn't occurred to you. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. There were several things there in that how-to section on the watch that were pretty good. They also included some information from Consumer Reports about some testing that they did on the Apple Watches as far as the scratch resistance and everything. The data that they have essentially mimics what other people have said about the scratch resistance of the Apple Watch. The sports model is a little less resistant to scratches. But if you're familiar with the Mohs scale, the scratch resistance on it's about a 7. The scratch resistance on some of the other models goes up to an 8 with that sapphire um, uh, glass or crystal rather. And it doesn't, here's the thing, just because it's scratch resistant doesn't mean it can't be cracked, obviously. We need to make a distinction between that. But you also need to be aware of, you might see on the net some reports of the crystal being scratched by sandpaper. That's because the some variants of sandpaper, depending on what the oxide is made out of, are actually harder than the crystal is supposed to stand up to. So that's something to be aware of. For me, as I've said before, much like some of our other members, for me personally, I'm going to hold off a bit on an Apple Watch for mainly because it doesn't really meet a significant need for me. One thing that it would solve for me is sometimes when I have my watch on my phone on vibrate, I will miss a call or a notification, but that doesn't happen often enough to justify my going out and grabbing an Apple Watch at this point. As it matures a little bit and that whole watch ecosystem matures, I may take another look at it. But for right now, I'm at a position where my current MacBook Pro is from 2008. So from a use of resources standpoint, it might be smarter to take the money that I would normally have spent on an Apple Watch and hold off in case I have to purchase a new computer. Not that I anticipated. I'm not having any problems at this point, but 7 years is a good long run. I do see occasional beach balls on my machine, but it's usually when I'm putting it under a significant amount of stress. The other piece of information that came out of iWatch this week, out of the Apple Watch, that caught my attention purely because I was not expecting this. I haven't kept up with some of the apps that have come out for the Apple Watch yet. I haven't really checked into that too much. And I was kind of surprised to see that Adobe has a trio of Apple Watches. I'm looking down my notes here to see which ones. Adobe Color with the Creative Cloud version, Behance, and Color CC, which is Creative Cloud, and Creative Cloud apps have been updated so that you can look at those. You have some capability on the Apple Watch, and it includes Apple Watch support. And their reasoning is that designers get a lot of their best ideas out in the field when they're not near a computer. Okay, so this gives them a way of interacting with their apps and gathering in other information while they're not at a computer. I can see that being potentially useful for some people, particularly for people who spend a lot of time with color. You see a particular color in the environment, out in the environment. You want to grab a part of it. Could you do that with a phone? Yeah, but maybe it's a little more convenient to do it with a watch. I'll be curious to see as more and more of our members get their hands on Apple Watches. I'll be curious to see what they think of these, particularly with the Apple Watch being used in situations that we don't normally think of. In situations like that, where I wouldn't have thought of using a watch. One of my things that I'm going to be watching is the fitness information. I know that there things like Fitbit already exist, and there are some similar things for Android. But I'm going to be curious to see how that data, or rather, what becomes available as we move forward. There's already some interesting applications of these fitness devices linking with the iPhone. So what I'm going to be interested in seeing is what will happen as they adapt to the watch, and what new things will become available that aren't here now. It's always kind of fun when a new piece of technology arrives to see what developers do, what app developers do. A lot of times that has a lot to do with how big a market you have. Can you convince users and other partners that this is a good thing? Some of you may remember that when the video cassette recorder came out, there were a lot of people who just couldn't see a need for it. The movie industry was convinced that it was going to ruin their business. And in fact, with the advent of videotape rental, it may have done the exact opposite. Especially in the area of taking a movie that may not have had mega box office draw and turning DVD into a VHS or DVD into another viable distribution and another revenue stream. So I think you'll see a similar thing with the Apple Watch and with wearable in general. As it improves and the designers get a feel for what capability the user wants, and the app builders get a feel for what we want apps to do, I think you're going to see some much more interesting things. When I first saw the demo, I saw a demo video with the Google glasses. It's an area that I wouldn't be comfortable with. I'm not sure I want somebody recording what I'm doing while I'm interacting. I personally wouldn't be comfortable with that. Someone younger than I am might be. As we maneuver around these different pieces of technology, I think we'll have a better understanding of not only what they can and can't do, but we need to remember that a large part of this is going to be directed by what we want them to do. If we don't want recording capability, video recording capability, for example, then we've got to give manufacturers the incentive not to build that in, or to omit that, or at least to have an option so that you can choose to say, no, I don't want this. I want this capability, I don't want this one. That'll be, and some of that's going to be driven on a per app basis. Some applications will include features, some won't. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see how that develops. I'll certainly be keeping an eye on it. If for no other reason, then it's interesting to me. So we'll help you keep an eye on that. And I want to remind you also, when it comes to that, of course, the forum is going to be your go-to source for a lot of information. We have not done a separate watch thread yet, a separate area for watches. We've got a thread going on the Apple Watch, but we haven't done a separate segment of the forum segment, if you will, for the watch. That will depend on how that goes, how many people are asking questions, a number of other things. Speaking of asking questions, I want to remind you, there is a sticky thread in the forum about writing a quality post. It might be tremendously helpful when you're asking a question. look at that thread. It gives you an idea of some of the information that we frequently need to know in order to help you solve your problem. So if you find that you're writing a post, understand that when we say what version of the operating system are you using, how much memory are you running, which Mac do you have, which version of the application, let's say you're talking about iPhoto, all of these things are being asked not because we like annoying you or anything like that, and we fully understand that you may or may not know all of that information, but the reason for asking it is that you sometimes that makes a difference. Um, for example, go back to the iPhoto problem that we mentioned early in the show. Some users, when they run into this problem, they're seeing the no symbol, for lack of a better word, over iPhoto. Now, in earlier versions of the OS, when people moved to 10.7, they were seeing that same icon for a completely different reason. And it has to do with under 10.7, you lose the ability to run PowerPC applications. The older code for the G3s, G4s, G5s, and their predecessors. So that symbol meant one thing. When you're seeing it now for iPhoto, and particularly for recent incarnations of iPhoto, obviously it's going to mean something different because those recent incarnations were already coded for Intel processors. And you don't see that PowerPC warning on those newer applications. So the no symbol is not because it was old enough to be running PowerPC code. In this case, the no symbol was it was incompatible with the version 10.10.3 of Yosemite. So that's something to keep in mind. I hope that that helps and didn't really confuse things a whole lot. This stuff can get a little confusing from time to time. And I'm going to throw in a little bonus here. Another thread that came up this week in the forum, and it comes up periodically from time to time, about someone they have DVDs of home movies or something like that that's not copy protected, but they can't import it into iMovie. That's because iMovie does not read the same type of files that a DVD player needs to read. In order to get the file into iMovie, you have to convert it from these VOB, these video object files. You see them as .vob. To something that iMovie can read, such as MP4. That conversion is going to need some type of conversion software. There are a number of good applications out there. I've personally used Handbrake and MPEG Streamclip, which are two free versions, but there are others out there as well. But that's why you don't see that. I didn't have that in my show notes, but that has come up this week. It's come up a couple of times before, and I hadn't mentioned it until now. As I say, it's not an issue with the things being copy protected, but more along the lines of it's just not there. It's in a format that's not useful. So you have to make some adjustments there. I want to be sure I mention to you as well, when you're doing these kinds of conversions, sometimes it'll take a couple of tries to get something that's workable. Don't panic, just keep plugging away at it. If you find that you're running into issues, give some of the guys on the forum a quick shout. We're pretty good. We don't know all of the answers, but sometimes we know where to look. And with the thousands of members that we have, and we're adding hundreds of new members every week, you're bound to find someone that has run into the same issue. Well, that's going to just about do it for me this week. That's all the new information that I had. I'm sure there was a lot of other things went on. As you'll notice, some weeks I have a little more time to ferret out useful information. Summer is coming. I'm going to work on a couple of things that might make the chat a little more interesting. As usual, there's a thread going in the forum on these Sunday chats. For the last couple of several weeks, maybe a month or more, well, more than a month, probably the last couple of months, we've been posting the links to the show, the information discussed in the show. That thread is also a good place to post if you have a comment or a question about or suggestion for improving the show. So do join in. Feel free to chime in. I do look at that thread and look at all the suggestions. I'm sure somebody's going to come up with some really good ones. And that's going to just about do it for me this week. Until next week, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed having the opportunity to bring you this information. I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you in the forum. You'll see me around as Sly Dude. That's my username in the forum. I hope to see you there. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have. And until next week, this has been the Mac Forum video chat. Hope that you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next Sunday.